I'm Elephant Dice, and this is my YouTube channel. Over the weekend, I ran a one-shot for my players. They met Santa Claus, braved a totally wicked Norista, explored an ancient crypt, and fought a big, mean, white dragon, Kozamanak. Except, my players never actually heard the white dragon's name, Kozamanak, because white dragons don't like to talk. They just don't play with their food. 'Twas a valiant effort. It was a really tough fight. Multiple players dropping repeatedly, until at last they threw down their enemy and smote his ruin upon the mountainside. Gandalf style. White dragons, also known as glacial dragons, glacial worms, wyrms, or virms, whatever you call it, comment down below. White dragons have always been recognized as the weakest and the most feral of all of the typical 5 chromatic dragons. But I think weakest is kind of a horrible word choice here. Well, white dragons don't really like to talk and don't have the vanity of a lot of other dragons. They can be completely terrifying just as a result of their primal nature. These are some pictures from my game, but this guy is an absolute unit. He eats his Wheaties. He's an absolute force of nature. White dragons are nothing to be laughed at. The crazy part is, I played the dragon completely by the books. But in terms of flavor, I don't know if I actually gave the white dragon everything that I wanted to give him. It didn't feel like what I would do if I were designing a white dragon encounter. Especially for my more serious homebrew campaign. So how would I design a white dragon encounter? Well, if I can be frank, and I'm Joseph, I would actually do something that a lot of people would probably think is kind of weird. I would never, ever put white dragons in their lairs. Now, before you go off and lair actions are great, I just need to preface and say, I know they're great. Lair actions are some of the best mechanics and the best things that exist in Dungeons & Dragons. Lair actions can be used to add tension, drama, and urgency to a critical fight in your campaign. In the Dungeon Master's Toolkit, lair actions are one of the most effective ways in which you can even out the action economy. But ultimately, I would never use lair actions with a white dragon because thematically it makes no sense. White dragons are apex predators of the Arctic, Antarctic, whatever Arctic. They are killing machines. White dragons are apex predators of the cold. And the only way that they attain that status is by being hunters. Now, before you think this is a supernatural reference, let me just say, unlike other dragons, white dragons are motivated solely by what they need. They are 100% primal, and their desires, their motivations, and literally everything they want is driven by the necessity of survival. Sure, they might like shiny things, but what's more natural than liking shiny things? The fact of the matter is, I would never put a white dragon personally in their lairs, because that doesn't sell the tale of Hunter to me. And no, that's not a supernatural reference. If my players run into a white dragon, there's only one season for them to do so. Hunting season. But there's a big problem with just taking vanilla white dragons from 5th edition Dungeons & Dragons and not giving them lair actions. And the problem isn't really for white dragons alone. One of the biggest criticisms that a lot of people have with 5th edition is honestly with dragons. If you look at every dragon stat block, they literally have the same abilities, the same attacks, the same everything, with the exception of their elemental damage and resistances. They basically are the exact same thing, copy and pasted, for every single chromatic. And there's no other dragon that gets as hurt by this as the white dragon. Why? Because white dragons are already recognized as the weakest of dragons. Well, white dragons aren't aristocratic like other dragons.
They're a beast that truly can never be tamed. Literally the embodiment of raw nature and the power of nature itself. White dragons are forces to be reckoned with.
So if I want white dragons to be the true apex predators of the Arctic, how is it that I'm going to just take their base template, which is boring, and make it good without layer actions? The decisions we make as dungeon masters can decide whether or not our combat turns into a fight or a random encounter. Think about that for a minute. Most of the time I spend playing D&D is in combat, whether I'm the player or the dungeon master. It's usually combat. But the problem is that combat can get really long sometimes and also pretty boring. I actually space out fights in my game and make them a lot more challenging than they probably should be for my PCs. And the reasoning is because it creates an expectation for my players that they can't just fool around and get away with anything. Combat is deadly in my game, and I like it that way because it actually makes it feel like a challenge. So as dungeon masters, our job is to also add flavor and challenge to the game so that our players can really get an immersive experience. I think one great example of something you can do to sell the idea of white dragons being hunters is giving them hunter's mark at will. Because come on, this dragon's going to be hunting whales, bears, player characters. They're hunting every second of every day that they are awake. And yes, I said whales. Did you know that white dragons are the only of the chromatic dragons that have movement speeds on all terrain? They can run on land, they can burrow, they can fly, they can swim. Could you imagine the look on your players' faces if you remade Jaws and instead of a great white shark, it was a great white dragon? There's a saying that goes, location, location, location. If you are running a white dragon and you are not at least thinking about the location or the terrain for the fight, you've basically missed the point of running a white dragon. The stat block for white dragons literally has Ice Walk as an ability. There is no reason that you should not take advantage of just snow or ice or any form of terrain in which they would be excellent hunters in. And white dragons don't even need to be fight to the death dragons either. Personally, I'd be a lot more terrified of a dragon if it just ambushed the party once, inflicted a lingering, horrible bite wound, and then left. And then continued to do it again and again. Could you imagine a white dragon that once it bit you, inflicted exhaustion? And could you imagine if that exhaustion would grow over time unless they did something about it? You can make them do whatever you want at the end of the day. Make a white dragon breathe fire. But if you're gonna roll initiative, you better make those monsters matter.
Hey everyone, Elephant Dice here. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you haven't figured it out, I like elephants. There's like a book and a ton of elephants behind me. And I also like dice, hence the Dungeons and Dragons channel. New content coming soon, hopefully. But yeah, thank you for all your support. Yes, thank you.